Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions. This time we're back with the newest trope talk. This time, idiot plots. Now I'm going to take a guess as to what this is, but first, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love to have joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Okay, what I'm guessing this is that it pretty much is reliant on characters being dumb, which is extremely fucking infuriating. You see this a lot with, I think, superhero movies tend to do this a lot. They tend to have our protagonists be exceptionally ignorant, is, I think, the best way of putting it, ignorant. So, yeah. Go ahead and dive right in.
This video was sponsored by Campfire, guaranteed to never jump to wild conclusions about a half-overheard conversation.
Yep, okay. It
Some
is what I
tropes
think it
have
is.
nice, chill, non-judgmental names that communicate their general vibe in intriguing and fun ways. And then there's this. The idiot plot, as defined by Roger Ebert back in 1990, is any plot that would be resolved in 5 minutes if everyone in the story were not an idiot. The gist is that some stories are contrived to happen only through the
problem posed by the needs of the plot has a simple or obvious solution. The characters do not do that, making them look kinda dumb, and makes them look dumb. At its worst, the needs of the plot / hand of the author actively force the leads out of character to facilitate events they would otherwise prevent.
remarkable stupidity of the characters involved. Simple solutions will be ignored, characters will make bad decisions that lead to extremely predictable bad consequences, and overall the situation will contrive itself to be as convoluted as possible at the cost of making the characters involved seem very, very dumb.
Now, sadly, I can't think of any good examples of this, so I don't know how much I'm going to be able to say here.
Audiences will typically respond to such stories by noting the simple solutions being pointedly sidestepped and questioning why the characters are having such a hard time with such a basic problem, which can provoke frustration with both the characters and the writer. It's generally not
because this also is different from the miscommunication trope. I really hate the miscommunication trope, but that is different from idiot plot, even though, well, I guess miscommunication and idiot plot sometimes go hand in hand. I think of The Last Jedi and specifically the miscommunication trope being used with Admiral Holdo. Aside from, there are things I love about The Last Jedi, but then so many that I hate. It is a movie that gives me whiplash when I think in depth about it. Like, The Rise of Skywalker is just a dumb movie, so like it doesn't give me whiplash with anything really. It's just bad, in my opinion, with pretty much the entire writing choice, every single writing choice, story choice made in that movie. The Last Jedi has some extremely cool ideas, and then there's the Admiral Holdo plot. And it is just whiplash. Like, and then also like the concept behind what Finn and Rose were gonna do, their whole plan, I thought was a genuinely good plan. Go get a hacker or whatever the fuck, and then like they don't end up meeting with the right person because they get like arrested beforehand. I thought that was a good plot. However, I don't think that was a plot line that could be properly conveyed in the time that The Last Jedi had to tell the story that it wanted to tell, right? Because it was a 2.5-hour movie. I don't think that plot line that Finn and Rose were going down was capable. Like, while I think it could have been done really well. I actually see a lot of potential in that plot line. However, I just don't think it was conveyed well. I think if they had maybe been given more time, maybe if Last Jedi was instead like Last Jedi could, I feel like, be one of those movies that could fit into be translated into a season 1 of a season of a series. If we look at the sequel trilogy as a series, in regards to Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker, I don't think you could do this. This is a tangent completely unrelated to idiot plots, kind of, but I'm going with it anyways because I want to talk. They had, like, those two movies I don't think had the storylines or the material really inside of them to stretch them out into a good season, they would have felt overbloated like Kenobi did for me. But I think Last Jedi had enough going on within it and enough intricacies being hinted inside of it where if they had decided, where if it had been a season, like a 10 episode, hour long episodes, 10 episodes for one season, I think Last Jedi probably could have been really fucking good. But of course, that is really that's changing it a lot to where it's no longer really the same thing. So I can't really, you can't grade a movie based on the potential, sadly. Sadly, at least in my opinion.
Not too bad if the audience gets mad at a character for doing something bad, since at least that means they're immersed in the story, but if the audience starts getting mad that the author made the character do that, the audience is officially aware of the hand of the author shoving the plot in specific directions, and their immersion is compromised. Now this spicy number is a pretty subjective judgment, but there's actually a surprising amount of depth to unpack here. Is the idiot plot always bad? Is it a shortcut or a narrative weakness of the author? Is it even a trope, or is it just a criticism of bad writing? Well, spoiler alert, but I wouldn't be talking about it here if it were any of those things. Idiot plots sound pretty terrible, but there are ways to make them work. And to defend this hot take, let's throw back all the way to the literal first thing I did on this channel, Shakespeare. William Shakespeare, the bard himself, wrote nearly 40 plays in his lifetime, and almost all of them hinge on a single dramatic plot point: miscommunication. Characters will make assumptions.
Oh, she is bringing in combining miscommunication with idiot plots. I mean, I get, well, idiot, yeah, I guess for the most part that if the story has an idiot plot, then miscommunication is a vital, crucial, critical part of that plot, of that story, for it to, I guess, work. Still frustrates me to know
About other characters and act on those assumptions.
And miscommunication can be done well. However, it is hard to do well, I feel like. Because in order to do it well, you have to really establish why these characters are not going to communicate, why they have not communicated. Hence why the miscommunication, or they tried in Last Jedi to make the audience make you believe that Admiral Holdo has good reason not to trust Poe. However, the way it felt communicated to me was that I don't know, I understand what they were going for. They were like not wanting to communicate plans to him because he was a hotshot. However, the plan in question they were wanting to do felt more like they weren't wanting, that felt more like a plan that you don't tell people if you don't want the enemy to know what you're going to do. And nowhere within that sequence of that plot did I ever feel like there was a traitor in the midst of the rebellion, of the Alliance, or whatever the fuck they were called. So for me, that's where it felt like. And like, if it had been, maybe it could have been fixed by having it be General Leia going, yo, you're a hotshot. Like, if it had been her saying it herself, straight to his face, so straight to the audience, then I think it would have been fine. But because it's a character we have never met before, telling a character we grew to love in Force Awakens, and she was not at all in Force Awakens, that makes it frustrating for me. Right? Like, if it had been Leia if it had been clear that, like, if they had not knocked out Leia, and it had been Leia to tell Poe, hey, sit your ass down, or whatever, pretty much like what Admiral Holdo did, that would have been believable, because that also fits in with kind of the character of Princess Leia that we know. She's a very much, she's a bit hot-headed. She definitely cooled down by the events of the sequel trilogy, but she's still fiery. she's still like a get to it action kind of person, but she's also still very much a we're gonna do things my way person, you know, kind of just like how Poe is. And so if it had been a character that's already established to us in the story, do not tell Poe the plans. That would have made sense. They tried to make it up for by having, I think, Leia later say that it was her idea, but that should have been a thing, you know, established at the get-go. Or maybe I gotta rewatch the movie. I rewatched it like almost 2 years ago now. I rewatched all of the movies, and so I might be misremembering, but I don't know. There's just that plot line did not. I don't see any potential in that plot line. I thought that plot line was pretty stupid. Led to a very beautiful moment. However, it was just frustrating to me.
Assumption, leading to wacky hijinks in the comedies and body counts in the tragedies. Characters act impulsively and irrationally, either for dramatic or comedic effect. Romeo kills Tybalt in a rage after Tybalt kills Mercutio, and when he thinks Juliet is dead, he kills himself immediately, leading Juliet to do the same when she wakes up literally seconds later. Othello is gaslit by Iago into thinking his beloved wife Desdemona is having an affair, and because they never actually communicate about any of these suspicions, he ends up killing her moments before learning the truth. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, upon learning that Macbeth will be king but Banquo's heirs will succeed him, assume that the only way to make this work is to kill the king and then kill Banquo and his son to guarantee he won't succeed them, which is a classic self-fulfilling prophecy, but also sidesteps the other possibility one might conclude if one was a little less murder-happy, that Macbeth would either have no heirs or would have a daughter who married Banquo's son. They jump to the murder conclusion and write their own downfall easy peasy. On the comedy side of things, the climax of Twelfth Night's entire plot is a comedy of mistaken identity, because people keep mistaking Sebastian for his disguised twin sister Viola, and Viola has meanwhile gotten herself tangled in a full love triangle. None of this plot would have happened if the people involved were clear about who they were and what they wanted, and in fact, one large honest conversation is all it takes to end the play in a satisfactory manner. These characters act dumb at several intervals, but they also act in ways that make sense for who they are. Romeo is impulsive and emotional and feels all his feelings very strongly, leading to his two big dumb decisions, killing Tybalt and killing himself. Everyone in Twelfth Night assumes they know who they're talking to and thus don't clarify their statements. They casually address Sebastian as Viola and vice versa, because why would anyone assume that the person they're talking to is actually that person's secret identical twin? Othello is established as passionate and emotional, and Iago actively fosters his paranoia, driving him away from Desdemona so they can't reconcile their conflicting stories. Hamlet is an interesting case because he's genre savvy enough to know what kind of story he's in, and he tries very hard not to do what the plot wants him to do because he knows he's been slotted into the role of doomed tragic Orestes style hero, but his self-pitying angst and constant delays mean the situation deteriorates around him until he's made so many enemies trying to get rid of him in complicated ways that the finale has a ridiculous accidental body count. The characters act dumb, but in a way that makes the audience sympathize with them rather than getting mad that they're not perfect computational logic machines who at all points in the story make the maximally efficient decision. I mean, most people don't get mad about that. These plays are, in whole or in part, idiot plots. Major events in the story happen only because characters act impulsively or fail to communicate with each other. And they're also really good stories. Crucially, this is because the characters never break character for the needs of the plot. Characters can do dumb things without it being bad writing. Many comedies hinge on the fact that the characters choose wacky hijinks over sensible solutions and complex lies over simple honesty. Where the idiot plot becomes a problem is when it stops making sense for those characters to do those dumb things. At this point, I think it's important to bring up two other tropes that are basically just smaller and bigger versions of the idiot plot. On one end of the scale, we have the idiot ball, which is when a character who is established to know
character we expect to know better suddenly becomes acting unusually dumb to enable plot points. They would typically probably force
better suddenly begins acting in conveniently irrational ways to specifically enable the needs of the plot, as if they have picked up the idiot ball. And on the other end is the second order.
The idiot setting. The premise of an entire world is maintained only by everyone in the entire world being dumbed down to facilitate the needs of the plot.
Idiot plot, or as I personally call it, the idiot setting, in which an entire world only functions the way it does because every single person in that world has a specific blind spot, character weakness, or weird oversight that keeps them from making very simple smart decisions. Many particularly contrived dystopias fall into this category, where the unique trait that seems to set our plucky protagonist apart from the rabble is a single whiff of critical thinking. These two extremes frame the Goldilocks zone of the idiot plot, where decent writing can still exist. But for the most part, the idiot ball and idiot settings are the byproducts of iffy writing and cannot themselves be good. The idiot ball is, of course, a problem because by its nature it forces characters out of character. Worse, it forces them out of character to make a specific plot happen, which means it's a shortcut that lets the writer bypass writing that plot organically. Instead of coming up with a reason the characters would have to play out this specific scenario, external circumstances forcing their hand, simple solutions being shown to be non-viable, etc., the easy solution is to just make the characters do what the writer needs them to do, no matter how much that contradicts their established characterization and the basic logic and compassion we'd expect them to display. Characters who have previously been shown to be kind or clever or meticulous in their planning will suddenly be cruel, myopic, or impulsive just because that's the easiest way to keep them from preventing the plot the writer wants to make happen. Some idiot plots, especially in serialized media, suffer from this in a big way. If characters who have been shown to act one way in previous installments suddenly pivot to acting in a much more conveniently irrational way that just so happens to enable whatever exciting set piece or forced conflict the story needs. Because not every idiot plot is Shakespeare. A character making a bad decision because of a personally established fatal flaw is a good tragedy in the making. A character making a bad decision because there's no way this character would let this specific plot happen otherwise is a case of the idiot ball. If enough characters get smacked with the idiot ball, it can morph into a full-on idiot plot, and these idiot plots are rarely compelling. A key factor here is that we expect better from these characters, which is not something we typically feel in stories where the character's dumb or illogical actions make sense for them. We might wish they acted better, but we aren't surprised when they act the way they do. Say, for instance, that the writer really wants two of our heroes to fight each other. There's a lot of reasons this would appeal. The potential drama in a clash of heroes can't be overstated. The audience wouldn't know who to root for, and sometimes it's just really cool to watch two super powerful badasses absolutely go to town on each other and see them use all their fun tactics and special moves. The problem, however, is that heroes are typically on the same side. In fact, this is a mandatory prerequisite for some of the really fun hero fights, since the emotional impact of two friends fighting is a lot more impactful than two enemies doing what we expect enemies to do. So if we want two people who should be on the same side to fight, how do we make that happen? Well, maybe we brainwash one of them for a classic I know you're in there somewhere fight, but that's not really the heroes fighting, since the brainwashed character isn't themselves. Or maybe we highlight deep-seated points of contention, fundamentally irreconcilable worldviews that circumstances eventually force the heroes to come to blows over. Or maybe one of the heroes is trying to stop the other from doing something they'll regret, fighting them to save them in the long term. But that sounds like a lot of work. You know what would be easier? Just making the characters hate each other for a bit. And of course they'll want to fight. Drop in a little forced conflict and let them fight over a shared love interest or a minor bit of ego bruising or a good old-fashioned miscommunication that could be resolved in 10 seconds of punch-free communication. The only downside to this cunning shortcut is that characters will spend the lead up to the fight acting bizarrely myopic and petty, and when the conflict inevitably does resolve, the simplicity of the solution can highlight how dumb the whole fight was in the first place. The easier it is for our heroes to resolve their differences, the dumber it makes them look that they started punching first. This is a shortcut that turns a potentially interesting conflict into a tedious one, and it does that by using an idiot plot. I think we should draw another internal subdivision here. There are broadly three kinds of idiot plots: comedies, tragedies, and accidents. Comedic idiot plots are things like
a comedy that hinges on the characters acting implausibly, goofy, or dumb. The story is aware that its plot is enabled by this. That's the joke. Yeah, that
coms or sitcoms,
no problem
where all
with
the
those.
characters have specific idiosyncrasies and quirks that dictate the hijinks they get into. They don't act like real rational people, but they do enable a lot of punchlines. Comedic idiot plots are funny because the characters act like clowns rather than rational, relatable people. The idiot plot is the joke and very intentional. The entertainment lies in seeing just how long an entire cast can go without realizing, for instance, their one erratic friend is actually twins. Tragic idiot plots are actually quite
tragedy that is partially enabled by the protagonist making unwise or reckless decisions. The preventability of the tragedy is part of the heartbreak. Yes, however, I don't know if I would call this idiotic. The unwise or reckless decisions, I think, fits better than calling it idiot, than being an idiot. As long as, you're aware of the character and, you understand why they are making the decisions that they make, right? I wouldn't, we'll go with Robb Stark's decisions in A Song of Ice and Fire. We know, and Ned Stark in the same vein. They are both very honorable men. And it's their honor that costs them their lives, right? Robb Stark with marrying forget the name of the house, some some Lannister vassal. He ends up sleeping with a vassal, the daughter of a vassal to Tywin Lannister. He marries her out of honor. Ned Stark, he approaches Cersei Lannister about his plan to tell Robert about that his children are not actually his children, and instead they are bastards. Which in turn gets him in trouble, causes Cersei to make a power play, which in then turn causes him to die because Joffrey. Yeah. So those I wouldn't really call idiot plots. It's just them. It's just they're acting in what they think is wise, right? Like, as obviously from a meta perspective, we know they're unwise, but in universe and in character, it's not necessarily unwise. It's them. Well, I guess in A Song of Ice and Fire, it is an unwise decision in universe, but in character, they don't see that, right? It's the difference here of like, does the character's personality, would they see this as unwise, or is them making this decision like pretty much expected of their character? If it's expected of their character to make a decision like that, then it is fine. But if it is not expected of the character, then it does not work for me.
Quite common in tragedies overall. Basically, any story where the tragic hero isn't being notably clever and trying to escape their own fate will involve the tragic hero making some reckless and unwise decisions that contribute to their eventual downfall. It's easy to judge tragic heroes by their poor decisions and the catastrophic consequences of their actions, but a key factor is that most tragic heroes don't realize they're in tragedies. They don't know that a grand romantic gesture or an exciting sword fight or a friend's betrayal is going to kick off a domino chain that'll completely ruin their life. In any other story, those would just be plot points, not the beginning of the end. With the benefit of context, an audience can easily see why a certain decision will go very wrong, and that dramatic irony is a major factor of what makes tragedies so impactful. But giving the audience information the characters don't have can make the characters seem, well, dumber. Many tragedies wouldn't happen if the characters were perfectly rational and honest in their communication, making them technically idiot plots. But in the same way, as we've discussed in the Trope Talk on tragedies, the whole point of many tragedies is that they only happen because of the specific character flaws of the tragic hero. The downfall is tailor-made to the protagonist. The hero makes those decisions because of who they are, and if they were anyone else, the tragedy wouldn't happen, or at least wouldn't happen the same way. This means that hero making bad decisions isn't a plot hole, it's kind of the whole point. It's the specifics of the tragic downfall that make it so compelling to watch. A modern tragedy that follows this to a T is Hadestown, which, being a retelling of the tale of Orpheus and Eurydice, ends with Orpheus turning around, despite being warned that doing so will doom Eurydice to the underworld forever. Dumb decision, everybody knows it, everybody knows how the story is going to end. What makes this work is that the Orpheus we see at the beginning of the play wouldn't have done that. He was optimistic, a bright-eyed idealist. If someone told him to do this one thing and he'd save the girl, he would do it. But he spends the rest of the play being broken down over and over again. Doubt comes in, and in the end he can no longer see his idealistic vision of the way the world could be, but instead the scarred, mistrustful vision of the way the world has been to him up until now. As a result, by the time he leaves the underworld, he's grown justifiably mistrustful of Hades, and doubts that he would ever release Eurydice, leading him to believe that Hades is tricking him, and so he turns around. His journey to rescue Eurydice transforms them both. She takes on his optimistic worldview while he absorbs the jaded realism that weighed her down in the beginning, and in the end, the journey renders him incapable of rescuing her from the underworld, incapable of that one act of trust that would have given them their happy ending. Like any idiot plot, this story wouldn't happen if the characters just made smart decisions, and that's not in question. The story agrees with us that this tragedy was preventable. We know that. The tragedy is why these...
Essentially what this is coming down to is the story self-aware, right? The story needs to be self-aware that this plot is what is happening, because then it being, man, I don't know how to really properly word this. Like, I understand what I'm thinking in my head, but I don't know how to bring out the words. It's so, as long as the story is like pretty much telling you like the author, as long as like it's essentially trust in the author that yes, the author is aware that this is preventable. The author knows that the characters were capable of preventing them, but the author is taking them down the path that pretty much makes it unpreventable, you know? Right? Like, it was preventable for Orpheus to not look back, but because he'd been beaten down so much that he no longer had that hope, it makes sense for him to look back and no longer trust.
Characters don't make that one smart decision. The story and the audience both recognize that it would be better if the characters didn't do the dumb thing, and yet here we are, singing the same song, watching them make the same mistakes. Like comedies, tragedies that rely on idiot plots know that that's what they're doing. The story is aware that the protagonists are making bad decisions, and it doesn't try to frame those decisions as good or reasonable, just as things we understand those characters would do. But of course, there's still that third.
A story that is an idiot plot where it was not the author's intention for the characters to seem this dumb. Unlike comedic and tragic idiot plots, the characters acting dumb is not the point and feels like a writing mistake. Warning, subject.
Category: accidents.
Here's
These are idiot plots where the characters are dumb in ways that don't make sense for them. Now, this judgment is subjective since it's dependent on the audience's perception of the character and what actions do or don't make sense for them. But broadly, we can say that these are stories where the writer did not intend or did not realize that the characters are acting notably dumb to make the plot happen. There are a lot of ways this can manifest. Maybe a character attempts to explain the rationale behind their less than ideal actions, but the explanation feels inadequate to justify whatever it is they're doing, or it doesn't,
as I was saying with the Last Jedi plot,
cover all their bases. Maybe the characters fail to notice a simple solution that would allow them to escape whatever situation the plot is forcing them into without having to do any dumb contrived conflicts. In some cases, the stories might go a little overboard trying to cover all their bases and make it really clear why the characters have absolutely no choice but to do something dumb, when, as we've discussed in the tragedy and comedy case, it can totally work that the characters just choose to do something dumb of their own free will as long as that's in character for them. Driving home that the characters have absolutely no choice in the matter actually just removes their agency and can increase frustration with the idiot plot. Sometimes the writers will successfully put the characters in a bad situation via limited communication or misunderstandings, but then fail to explain why the characters don't immediately resolve the misunderstandings by just talking. This is a big problem in hero fight idiot plots, where getting them to fight in the first place isn't too hard, but stopping them from talking through the problems during the fight becomes tricky. There's something very funny about the big payoff fight in Batman v Superman and how much time Clark spends saying, "You have to listen to me," and "You don't understand," and slowly walking towards Batman and then throwing him farther away rather than just at any point saying, "My mom is being held hostage by a supervillain to make me fight you." Kinda undercuts the supposed desperation of the situation. We need to do some serious mental gymnastics to contrive a scenario where this makes sense. Accidental idiot plots are stories that don't want you to think the characters are dumb. Unfortunately, the way they attempt to influence their audience away from this conclusion is not by making the character act smart, or by sufficiently justifying their actions to make their illogical choices seem appropriate for who they are. This results in stories where the character's actions break the audience's immersion, which is fundamentally the problem this trope struggles with the most. We tend to expect fictional characters to act like people, and while that's a very subjective and personal judgment that varies from every person to every other person, if characters do things we think are ridiculous, or don't do things we think are obvious, we start to wonder why. If an answer is provided by the story, the obvious solution actually wouldn't work, the seemingly irrational action made perfect sense to them at the time, that keeps us immersed in the story even if we don't agree with what the character did. But if an explanation is not provided, it starts to look like authorial oversight, and we find ourselves contemplating the mechanics of the story and the writer behind it. And that means we're not immersed anymore. The problem with an idiot plot is not, as one might think, that the plot involves characters acting dumb. The problem is when it makes us question if the author is also dumb. So, yeah. And thanks again to Campfire for sponsoring.
That was Trope Talk, Idiot Plots. I hope you guys enjoyed. I think I said enough during the video. Don't need to say more here at the end. This was good. Red has such a good way at describing things that I do not. I talk too much. It's fun. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.